Chapter number 22 of The Greenstone Door by William Satchell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22, Part 2. Prisoner. Lifting the candle from the table, Aporo conducted me into a further room. The place showed signs of having been roughly cleansed, but the dry mud caked on the walls, and the absence of windows, save for the one small opening near the roof, gave it a dismal and depressing aspect. Little did I dream, as I looked distastefully around me, how familiar I was to become with every slab and crevice of that ill-smelling prison-house. However, there was a small iron bedstead in one corner, with a mattress and blankets upon it, which, in the expressed view of my captor, more than compensated for every other defect of the apartment. Cutting short his encomiums on this head, I wished him a curt good night, and watched him go forth and close the door behind him. This door opened into the room I had just left, and being thrown wide against the wall, had escaped any special observation till the sound of heavy bars falling into place directed my attention to its size and strength. Lifting up the candle he had deposited on the floor in the absence of any other convenient resting place, I scrutinized my prison. The walls, as I have said, were of rough pine slabs, 2 to 4 inches in thickness, and some 9 or 10 feet in height. They were sunk into the earth floor, as I afterwards discovered, to a depth of over a foot, and strongly nailed to stout cross pieces at top, middle, and bottom. In each corner and at the middle of the outer side were roughly squared timbers, holding the building rigidly together. Lighter slabs formed the roof, concealing the outer covering from view. The window or opening to the air was close up under the roof, square in shape, and not more than 9 inches in diameter. Having convinced myself that escape, for that night at least, was a matter of impossibility, I divested myself of part of my clothing, and, weary from exertion and trouble, was soon sound asleep. I do not propose to make a long story of my captivity. Though it lasted for 8 interminable months, it was diversified by few incidents, and these are soon related. Despite Aporo's promises, it was not until 10 days had elapsed that my protestations at length brought me into the presence of Tamihana. I was taken from my dungeon under strong guard to the house in which he was momentarily staying. It was a bare enough place for a maker of kings, no doubt, but it was comfort itself as contrasted with mine. The room he occupied was floored with a cheap oilcloth, and boasted a suite of furniture in the mahogany and horsehair of our grandfathers. A pedestal table of cedar occupied the centre of the room, and at this the son of Te Waharoa was seated, a large Bible open before him. If you would know what this man, the best and greatest of his race, was like in appearance, conceive an Irish peasant tanned to a rich bronze, with shock black hair and heavy, nearly meeting eyebrows, and he is before you. There was nothing about him to suggest his savage ancestry. His face was without tattooing, his forehead high and well developed. His brilliant dark eyes were full of kindliness and intelligence. Only in the prominence of the cheekbones and a slight distension of the nostrils did the Maori reveal itself. As my guard ushered me into the room, he rose quickly to his feet and came forward with extended hand, greeting me by name in English. I had proposed to myself not to reciprocate any courtesy he might show me until he had first explained his high-handed action, in causing my arrest, but so compelling were the charm and sincerity of his manner that my resolution was forgotten, and I took his hand in a cordial grip. "Is it the hand of a friend or an enemy, Tamihana?" I asked. "Alas," he replied in Maori, "that you should have reason to ask. It is not my doing." Then turning to my escort, he bade them leave the apartment. "Sit down," he continued when we were alone, "and let us speak openly to one another. To begin, if I were to say to you, 'Go now,' whither would you go?" "Where, chief, but to my house and to my tribe," I answered diplomatically. "Your tribe is the English," he said after a moment. "Go then, the way is open." "It is of the Ngati Maniapoto I spoke," I replied, "my tribe by adoption. It is to Matakiki that I desire to go." "You have heard of the Thumb, that he is no longer of the people of England?" "So I have been told, but it is a matter I would be convinced of from his own lips." "And when you are convinced, what then?" A glimmer of light came to me, and I hesitated. "It is a matter for grave consideration, chief," I said at last. "Speak truly, Tregarthen," he rejoined. "God has made all good things in pairs, the day and the night, the man and the woman, the friend and the enemy. Only he himself can be both." "I cannot fight against the men of my race, Tamihana," I replied. "It may be that my soul is not great enough, but so it is. Yet on the other hand, I will not fight against the men of yours." "He who is not with us is against us," he said, placing his hand on the Bible. For a while I sat silent, a prey to anxious thought. The object sought by my arrest was now clear to me. They dreaded not my open enmity, but the influence I might have on my foster father in his espousal of their cause. That, given freedom, I should use every means in my power to deflect him from his purpose, I knew quite well, and their action in taking me prisoner showed that they were equally certain on the point. "Do you mean," I asked at length, "that to gain my freedom I must either fight against the men of my race, or give an undertaking not to see my foster father?" He lifted his brows in assent. "It is a hard saying, Tamihana," I cried, "for either I must desert my people or my father. Can you find in those pages any passage that justifies the traitor?" "The third way," he answered, "is to remain here until the war is ended. Why should the Pakeha appeal to this book in his troubles? Does he even believe in it? It is good that the Maori should follow its teachings and become a Christian, submitting to all things, but it is good only for the Pakeha when it pleases or advantages him. Your missionaries have told us that the Bible is no longer for the Jews, but for all mankind. Yet when we speak to the government the words of the Bible, they smile at us or are silent. Was it not because we made a king of our own people that the government first became angry with us? Then hear the words of the book. One from among thy brethren shall thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. Have the government a Bible of their own, better than the Bible of the missionaries, that these words are of no account?" "It is to the New Testament you should look, Tamihana," I answered, "and not to the Old. There you will find little of kings, but much of peace and goodwill. Is it not possible even now to bring this trouble to an end by wise and temperate words, in place of guns and tomahawks?" The light of argument died from his eyes. "It is too late," he said. "If I spoke such a word in the Parliament, no man would listen. Mine would be a voice crying in the wilderness. The thirst for war is in the blood of the people." It is a passion that has no end but in fruition. Though he chose a different simile, his answer was identical in substance with that given me by the Governor. Brown man and white looked into the heart of the mischief and interpreted it alike. The road to peace ran through the iron gateway of war. "I must consider my answer, chief," I said, rising, "for at present the two ways you offer me seem alike impossible." "I would give you your freedom if I could," he responded, and repeated that my capture was none of his doing. "Then, if it be not yourself, Tamihana," I said, "where must I look for my enemy?" "Among the Ngati Maniapoto," he said, after a moment of thoughtful hesitation. "I will speak to him, that he also discuss the matter with you. Then make terms quickly, for soon, if not already, all roads between here and Auckland will be closed against the white man." My guard had retired no farther than the passage, and when I had bidden farewell to Tamihana, they again surrounded me and conducted me back to my prison. The time came when I fell into a state of listlessness, taking no heed of the passing days, but at first a rage of impatience possessed me. Hour after hour I paced the squalid room, despair and fury alternating in my heart. No harm or indignity was offered me, and of food, such as it was, I had plenty, but the guard over me never relaxed. All day long men came and went in the outer room, now in grave conversation, now relaxed in boisterous mirth. Even when long-continued silence seemed to denote the place was deserted, I had to make but an unusual sound to rouse an answering stir without. From the night of my coming I had seen no more of Aparo. Probably he was far to the front, watching the advance of the British arms into the historic basin of the Waikato, laying more deadly ambushes than that wherewith he had trapped me. My chief jailer was a big imbecile fellow, who seemed capable of understanding only two things: that I must be fed at regular intervals, and that I must not be allowed to escape from my prison. On every appearance he carefully scrutinized the cell with his wild blank eyes, searching floor and walls and roof for any sign that they had been interfered with since his last visit. Often I have awakened in the night with the glimmer of his candle in my eyes, or heard, as through a crevice in sleep, the falling to of the bar without that terminated such an inspection. He never entered the room, save when there were others outside to hinder any effort at escape. Mad or sane, no poor prisoner was ever cursed with a more efficient jailer. Many a time during the first few weeks did I gaze into his vapid countenance with murder in my heart. Now and then, especially when his eyes were turned elsewhere, he looked more like a great overgrown schoolboy than a man, and on such occasions there came over me an ill-defined notion that at some time in the past I had encountered him before. He seemed incapable of replying to a question or even understanding it, and, after one or two efforts to trace home my obscure recollection, by gleaning such particulars as his name and place of abode, I let him alone. The first month of my confinement was nearly at an end, when one morning he came hurriedly into my cell, mowing out some scarcely intelligible words which I took to denote the arrival of a visitor. The ordinary wildness of his manner was greatly accentuated, and as he stood muttering and gibbering in the doorway, looking alternately towards me and back over his shoulder, I was impressed with the feeling that the whole of the creature's mind was one ghastly terror. Speculating on the cause, I turned my eyes to the room without, in time to see the outer doorway darkened by a black shadow. Little as I could see of the man entering, it was sufficient to establish his identity, and in a flash I knew also my jailer. The intervening years passed as an obscuring vapour. Once again I stood with my boyish companion in the gateway of the pa. Once again I heard his cry of derision, "Here comes Hoppy with the bird's claw." No derision was in the heart of the poor wretch now, only an abject and unspeakable terror. "Go," said the tohunga curtly, and in an instant we were alone. The door closed and barred upon us. Te Atua Mangu moved with his eyes bent on the floor and seated himself on the edge of the bed. I had seen him often since the day of the runanga of the religions, but never thus near at hand, nor in the whole of my life had I exchanged a dozen words with the bogey of my childhood. He looked slowly round the room, taking in floor, walls, and roof. Then, with a motion of his hand, silently invited me to a seat beside him. "Welcome, Black One," I said, setting my shoulders against the wall. "Friend or enemy, you are better than solitude." "Why does the Pakeha remain here?" he asked in a low, even voice. "There are no comforts such as the white man loves." "True, O priest," I answered with a short laugh. "Perhaps, then, it is after all the solitude of which I am enamoured. Set wide the door, that the matter may be made clear." "Presently," he said calmly. "Let us talk. Tamihana has told me that you desire to return to Matakiki. It is a good thing that the bee go back to the hive to which it belongs, and not to that of the stranger. Where, then, is your hive? Is not the home of the bee the place where it has lived and laboured? Good. There is trouble in that hive. The bees are angry. They have sharpened their stings against an enemy that would despoil them. Go, then, make ready your weapons, that you also may defend the hive that nurtured you." "My heart is not in this quarrel, Black Spirit," I answered. "I can neither fight with you nor against you." "Then why is it you seek to return to Matakiki?" "That is easily answered. I would be with my people in their trouble. When trouble comes to the hive, the drones are driven forth. They have mouths, but no stings. You are answered." I find myself wondering if a man's moral sense becomes laxer as he grows older, or is it merely that he is more tolerant of weakness in others? It seems marvellous that I did not attempt to deceive him with lying promises, yet, to the best of my belief, no such thought found a moment's harbourage in my mind. Nevertheless, so possessed was I with my single idea, that even liberty itself seemed worthless if it could not help me to the side of those I loved. He rose to his feet and took a lingering step towards the door. Then, as though arrested by a fresh thought, returned to his seat. "That talk is finished," he said. "There is another matter. The mind of the thumb is troubled. He looks two ways, and he who looks two ways stumbles. It would be good, therefore, that you send a message to him, that his heart may be free from care concerning you." I saw what I conceived to be my opportunity, and grasped it. "If an account of my present condition will relieve his mind, Black One," I answered, searching my pocket for paper and pencil, "he shall have it." "Good," he responded stolidly. "Write these words: I go to the city of the Pakeha until this trouble is over. Proceed with the things you are doing. It is a good thing. With myself all is well enough for this time." I laughed and closed my pocket book with a fierce snap. "What terms do you offer me for doing this, Black One?" I answered. For the first time his shifty, red-litten black eyes looked steadily into mine. "Your life, Pakeha," he answered. For a moment I was staggered and at a loss. Ruthless as I believed him, it seemed incredible that he should proceed to such an extremity in cold blood. Yet, as his sinister eyes continued to gaze into mine, revealing not only an unshakable purpose, but even, as I seemed to read, a gloating desire, all illusion as to my value in the eyes of the natives fell from my mind, and I recognized the imminent peril in which I stood. Has the Maori so many friends among the white people that he can afford to destroy even one of them? I asked. Right, he replied. Many of your race have fallen in the Waikato. The war parties pause not to ask if they be friend or foe. Enough that they are white. Slowly, and with an appearance of reluctance, I opened the book and began to write as he had directed me. I had little hope of deceiving one so astute, and yet it was at least worth the trial. The words he had given me I wrote in English, adding immediately beneath in German, "This is written under compulsion. I am a prisoner at the meeting place of the waters." I dared not write Ngaruawahia, for that word could certainly be recognized among its unknown companions, and I chose English rather than Maori in the hope that the tohunga, having but a slight knowledge of the former language, would be unable to distinguish between it and the German that followed. No doubt his first act would be to submit the note to an interpreter, but as the first part was almost in his own words, there was just the possibility that the interpreter, having translated this, would be ashamed to display his ignorance of the few words remaining, and either give to them some innocent meaning from his imagination, or ignore them altogether. He took the leaf I tore from the book, and folded it in his hand without looking at it. "It is well," he said. "The talk is ended." He limped to the door and gave it an imperative rap with his knuckles. "How long am I to remain here, Black One?" I asked, as the bar fell and the face of my janitor appeared in the doorway. "Wait," he said. "Presently I will send a party to guard you to the lines of the Pākehā. There are many on the warpath, and alone you could not escape them." With that the door closed behind him, and I was left to the solitude of my prison. For a fortnight or more following this I was in daily expectation of release, or at the least a message from my father; but days and weeks passed and nothing happened. Long afterwards, when my foster father's papers came into my possession, I found the note I had sent him. The message in German at the foot had been neatly cut away, showing that in the prosecution of his business Te Mangu had taken no risks. As for the party that was to transport me through the war country, it never appeared, and in all probability was never intended to do so. Convinced at length that my release must depend entirely on myself, I began to devise and practise schemes for escaping. One after the other they resulted in failure. The only one I shall mention, perhaps it came the nearest to success, was an attempt to burrow out beneath the wall. I had no idea what a prodigious quantity of soil is packed into a few cubic feet of ground, until I attempted to store the product of my exertions beneath the bed. Then, though the hole widened with painful slowness, the mound of soil grew with such alarming rapidity that I was at my wits' end to know what to do with it. By letting my blankets hang to the floor, I managed for 2 days to hide the effect of my labours, but thereafter concealment became next door to an impossibility, and it was almost a relief to me when my janitor, detecting some crumbs of brown earth on the black floor, pulled aside my bed and disclosed my handiwork to the admiring garrison. I have read of ingenious prisoners who have broken through stone walls with no better implements than wire nails. All I can say is that they deserved their freedom. For me it was but a wooden shell that held me, and yet I could by no means get out of it. These attempts were all in the first 3 or 4 months of my captivity, for afterwards, what with the confinement and the semi-darkness, the relaxing of my muscles, and no doubt the shrinkage of my brain, I fell into a state of lassitude and melancholy, from which I could only rouse myself to an impotent fury. Books or papers were not to be had, and my one relief from self-absorption was in listening to the conversations in the room without. The parties using the house seemed to come and go, for I seldom heard their voices for longer than a week at a time, and always their talk was of the war, of battles and ambushes, of wounds and death. At first laughter and boasting prevailed. I heard of the small fish that fell here and there to the nets of the scattered taua, the unarmed settler and his boys tomahawked at daybreak in their fields, the farmhouse burned readily at dusk, milch cows driven off along the sloppy forest trails, and the feasts of good beef which closed the dreadful days. But as the months went by and winter gave place to spring, jest and boast failed, and doubt took possession of the minds of the warriors. The young men still made the house ring with their war songs, still looked forward to a day of victory, but it was not so with men of mature years. Many white men had been slain, settlers and soldiers, yet there was no relaxing in their advance. It seemed that for the white man there was but one road, forward. When the Maori suffered reverse, he fell back. So much ground was lost. Not so with the Pākehā. If he were checked, he lay still, enigmatically silent and motionless. Weeks went by, many weeks, and still his place was as a cemetery of the dead. Then, of a sudden, behold, he was alive again. On he came, cannon and men, driving all before him, and at night he was established in new country. To waylay and slaughter him was satisfactory only for the moment. Today his dead might be counted, but it was a hard thing to number his living on the morrow. There was nothing easier than to elude him for the time being, or more difficult than to turn him aside from his chosen path. There was scarcely an incident of the war that did not reach my ears. Skirmishes far and wide were graphically described by participants in them. I learned of the division of the councils that followed each reverse. Arguments for and against the fortifying of certain points were debated night after night. I do not think that any of the leaders ever entered the building, but no doubt what I heard was an echo of their disputes. A slow paralysis was creeping over the Maori arms. I heard of the battle of Puhi-Huia, the evacuation of Merimeri, the retreat on Rangiora, with the subsequent engagement at that place, the abandonment of the long-debated idea of fortifying Taupiri. Then one night I was awakened by the sound of bustle in the village. Lying still in the darkness, I could hear the confused sounds of voices, men's and women's, all turned to a note of excitement. Horses were stamping the ground in the neighbourhood of the hut, and now and again I caught the sound of hoofs galloping away in the distance. In the room without, a low-toned argument was in progress. I could distinguish the voices of 3 or 4 men, each adding his quota to the debate, while occasionally others, apparently pausing in the open doorway, would cry out to them to make haste. My heart began to beat, till, in the weakened state of my body, I could fancy the room trembling with the throb of it. Was it death that was coming, or freedom? I cared not which, so that the living death of my 6 months of captivity might come to an end. Thrusting my limbs out of bed, I hastily drew on my clothes and sat sick and trembling, awaiting the denouement. There came at last into the voices a sharp, louder note of finality, and a moment later the bar of my prison fell to the ground. The door opened, and my janitor, accompanied by several natives, appeared in the entrance. "You must come with us on a journey, little finger," said one of them, a sallow, consumptive-looking man, with fierce eyes. "This place is no longer safe for you." He gave a signal to the others, and ere I had time to guess their intention, they had seized and bound my arms together behind my back. I made no resistance, for my mind was consumed by the desire to leave the house on any terms. The end of the rope which secured me was passed to my janitor, and we trooped out into the open. The earth was bright with moonlight. Ah, that first breath of fresh early summer night air! So abject is the dependence of the mind on the body, that as I drew its invigorating balm into my lungs, it seemed that the rapture of it was worth the cost. And to experience it, I had endured 6 months of semi-darkness, amid filth and evil odours I have not attempted to describe, without once going into the open air. They led me to the brink of the river, where I was bidden to sit down in charge of my jailer while the party dispersed, presumably to get together such goods as they proposed to carry with them. My mind awakened from its long torpor, noted every detail of the scene with interest. Close at hand, a large canoe lay nose to the bank. From the prostrate position of many of its occupants, and the low wailing of the women who came and went about it, I concluded it contained either the dead or the wounded, possibly both. This canoe, no doubt, had been the bearer of the ill tidings which had roused the village. At first, seated apart, we attracted no attention from the busy crowd, but presently one individual wandered up, and then, as the news of the captured pakeha spread, another and another, till a score or more had satisfied their curiosity by sight of me. Some regarded me in silence, others threw me a taunt, a jest, and a few a word of compassion. Some, and these were all women, launched at me abuse and threats of violence, and, but for the interference of my jailer, one or two of them would possibly have proceeded to greater lengths. The idiot was plainly anxious about something, muttering disconnectedly, and continually turning to look behind him in the direction of the wharis. I took his disquietude to be on my account, until, with an exclamation, as one might cry "Eureka!" he seized the free end of the rope and knotted it round my ankles until the cord cut to the bone. Then, springing to his feet, he ran swiftly towards the village. There was something very horrible in the creature's entire disregard for the suffering he inflicted. I might have been a bale of wood for all the ruth he displayed in trussing me. For a few moments the pain was excruciating, then followed a sensation of numbness and a feeling that my feet were swelling to bursting point. By this time the owners of the canoe had apparently satisfied their curiosity concerning me. 3 or 4 minutes elapsed before any one again came near. At length I noticed a solitary woman emerge from the shadows immediately below me. For a while she stood looking about her, then, with a studious appearance of aimlessness, came step by step towards me. My blood chilled as I watched her. The rush of a savage with brandished weapon would have been less blood-curdling than the stealthy, watchful advance of this woman. At last she stood in front of me. So far as I could see, her hands were empty. Yet I had no doubt but in a few instants cold steel would be plunged into my bosom. "Alas, little finger," said a soft, compassionate voice. She turned her face to the moonlight, and with a wave of joy I recognized her. "Pepe," I cried, and verily I believe, had I been free to move, I should have caught her in my arms, so great was my delight in the sight of a friendly and familiar face. "Alas, little finger," she repeated, crouching down beside me, "who is it that has done this evil to you?" "I know not, Butterfly," I answered, "unless it be at the bidding of the black tohunga. For many months have I lain a prisoner in the village, and no friend has come near me. But now hasten to Ruka and speak to him, that he may take me under his protection before my jailer returns." She buried her face in her knees, and there was no need for the words in which she told me that her husband lay among the shrouded shapes in the canoe. "And there is no friend among the others?" I asked, after I had condoled with her in her misery. "They are Waikato and Ngati Hawa," she replied. "The flower of the tribes has fallen, and it is but a remnant that flees into the country of the Ngati Maniapoto." "Then find a knife to sever these cords," I said, "and I will shift for myself." She rose to her feet, and darting down to the water's edge, went rapidly along the bank until I lost sight of her among the folk around the canoe. A minute later she appeared again in a bright patch of moonlight betwixt the black shadows, coming fleetly back on her errand of mercy. As she turned directly towards me, I glanced over my shoulder, and there was the idiot coming at a wild gambol down the hill. Yet she was the nearer, and fell panting beside me, while my custodian was yet some 20 yards distant. "It is too late, little finger," she breathed. "If I free you, you will be taken again on the instant. But have no fear. If not at this time, then some other." "Quick, Pepe," I cried. "Put your knife to my breast, as if you would strike me." The clever girl caught my meaning on the word, and changing her aspect of compassion to one of hate, she brandished the knife above my heart. I had only time to give voice in a yell for help before the idiot was upon us. Striking the girl in the breast, he sent her rolling down the bank. Then, paying no further attention to either of us, he seated himself on the ground and poured from a broken gourd he carried in his hand a collection of shells, pebbles, and miscellaneous rubbish, the acute recollection of which had no doubt led him temporarily to desert his post. Ever since I have learned the creature's identity, my emotions had been in a state of fluctuation over him. Loathing and compassion daily overthrew each other. Now I could have strangled him with as little compunction as I could find for a wild beast. Again he was so clearly an object of pity that my other mood brought shame in the recollection. Murderous fury, all the more fierce for its helplessness, was in my heart as I watched the poor girl creep away, her hands to her breast, and turned to see the creature fondling and gloating over his treasures. No doubt I but brought myself nearer to his own level, when with a swing of my feet I sent his collection of trumpery flying in all directions. But I know that for the moment the act filled me with a glowing satisfaction. For a long instant he turned on me the wild glare of some savage beast despoiled of its young, but even as his great hands came out towards me, I read in his eyes the displacing of fury by terror. Muttering thickly, he set his fingers to the knots at my feet and released them from their bonds. Clearly he was bound by a will not his own, and that will, while it demanded that I should remain a captive, insisted that my life should be preserved. After an hour's delay, the great canoe, with its freight of dead and wounded, got under way, and a quarter of an hour later I was conducted to a seat in a second canoe, already loaded with fugitives and their belongings, and we set off in the wake of the first. By this time the moon was declining, and the heavy shadows cast by foliage on the river banks rendered the distinguishing of faces difficult. I knew that there were women in the canoe by the sound of their voices, and presently I discovered, by the feel of her skirt against my bound hands, that there was one on the seat immediately behind me. She was very still and silent, and I guessed, as was the case with many of the other occupants of the canoe, that she was asleep. My custodian himself showed signs of sleepiness. Every now and then his chin would fall forward on his breast, recovering itself with greater difficulty as time went by. However, he had taken the precaution of passing the end of the rope that bound me round his own body, so that I was not likely to reap any advantage from his lack of attention. The thwart was only wide enough for the two of us. 3/4 of an hour went by, and I was myself slipping into a semi-comatose condition, when I was suddenly startled to complete wakefulness by the pressure of hands against mine. They were a woman's hands, soft and small, and in a flash I knew that Pepepe had not deserted me. A warm breath tickled my ear. "You must swim, little finger." I pressed the hands that held mine. "Soon," breathed the voice again. The night had grown very dark. Beside me the idiot muttered in his dreadful sleep. The swish of the paddles alone broke the silence, save when at intervals the cry of the lookout on the bow carried a message to the paddlers. The few minutes of waiting seemed to spread themselves out into hours before at length Pepepe's hands again pressed mine, giving me the signal to be ready. A moment later the cords fell lightly from my wrists and my numbed arms dropped apart. A dread fear that I should be unable to use them was dispelled as the tingling blood regained its channels, revived the starving muscles. For nearly a minute I sat quite still, till every vestige of cramp had been smoothed away. Then, leaning sideways as though in sleep, I slipped over the side, and diving beneath the canoe, struck out beneath the water for the further bank of the river. End of chapter 22.